not the session you intended to be at. Just FYI, this is us. So I'm Erin Ingram. I'm a community engagement coordinator. I work at UNL. I'm on East Campus, and I'm part of the Institute for Ag and Natural Resources. I work with something called the Science Literacy Initiative, and I'm here with company today. So I'm going to pass it on over to Jenny Kishwani, who's going to introduce herself.
Morning, everybody. I'm Jenny Kishwani. I'm faculty in Biological Systems Engineering at the University of Nebraska. And I get to work with Ianr in the Science Literacy Initiative around campus. Lots of cool things we get to do with K-12 students and educators. So excited to have you all here today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Deepak Keshwani. I'm a faculty member here at UNL in the Biological Systems Engineering Department. And for the past few years, I've had the privilege of leading a team of faculty, staff, and students that has been developing educational video games focused based on research models and research data. And so we've received funding from NSF to do that, along with support from the Dowry Water for Food Institute. And so it's just been a great partnership, brought together many disciplines, and part of our job is to now disseminate some of the tools that we have, and we're excited to partner with Ianr Science Literacy to do that. So I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Awesome. And one more person that we're going to introduce today is going to be, and Chloe, I'm going to put you on the spot. Chloe is here. Chloe is actually one of the lead game developers. So Chloe, if you want to say hi.
Hello. Yeah, hi, I'm Chloe. I helped create Prairie Projector, Agpocalypse, and I'm also doing some work on modifying one of the other tools that you're, I think, going to see today. We're talking about Loopy today, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so I've helped with all that. I'll probably be around to help answer any technical questions that might pop up.
And we are so grateful to have Chloe to answer those technical questions. So just know you have on-demand tech support today. If you run into any issues as we're doing things, you can always just drop in the chat or just holler out, hey, I'm running into problems. We will send Chloe to the rescue and she will have something to fix, I'm sure, whatever we run into. So we're going to kick off today first with a little bit about what IANR's a little bit about our mission in IANR Science Literacy, because this really is the reason why we are so invested in game-based learning, because it matches our mission really, really well. So our goal is to enhance capacity both at the individual and the collective levels to make effective decisions grounded in STEM-informed analyses of complex real-world challenges. And that's quite a mouthful. It sounds like a lot. It is a lot, but it can be really fun. You're going to see here, and Christy Chambers, I saw you in here. I don't know if you're still in here. This is actually Christy Chambers in her garden at Elliott Elementary. They were doing a pollinator planting, so you made a little cameo. But these are the types of projects we really want to support and help people to be involved with, is taking real meaningful action. So success looks like, putting some sort of knowledge and skills to work to take meaningful action in some sort of system, complex real world system that is hopefully very accessible to them. And that is what you do as conservation educators all the time, right? You are actually getting them outside, seeing what's sort of out there and how hopefully they can enhance habitat or help out in keeping these spaces that we need for habitat, we need for other things, keeping them thriving. And so an example of this would be, this is another example in another school garden where students are understanding systems thinking about, decomposition and how you can grow soil, how you can build soil using cover crops. So they were realizing the soil quality in their garden was really, really poor. Started learning about you can actually grow something that the whole point is that you kill it to grow better soil, right? To make better soil. So they needed systems thinking skills in order to do that. They also needed to understand that they had some sort of control in this system. They had some sort of ability to make positive change. And so this is an ideal outcome for us, is that there are these actual knowledge and skills that students can put to work. I like to think of what we do as weaving a stronger tapestry. So when we talk about what can science literacy do to aid the work that you are all doing, I hope it's just enhancing what you're already doing. We know that like a ball of yarn by itself can't keep you very warm, but if you can put together lots of yarn in a particular way, you make yourself a blanket, this really useful, meaningful thing, right, that can keep you warm. We are hoping that some of these threads that we are adding to the mix are systems thinking and STEM-informed decision making. And that with those two things, you are going to be able to make a stronger tapestry of learning. So systems thinking can really help learners to understand the interconnectedness of seemingly unrelated or unconnected components in a system, to see that they actually are connected. And how making a small change in one area that you do have control over in a system can actually have these like cascade or ripple effect throughout other elements of the system that maybe you didn't think you had any control over. STEM-informed decision-making really is encouraging you to weigh options. Every decision is probably going to have trade-offs, pros and cons that you need to consider to make the best decision that you can. And so these two items are hopefully just going to strengthen, if they're included in your conservation education program, they're going to strengthen what you're already teaching students about. Now, this kind of knowledge and skill development may either sound, when I generally talk about this, like complexity, yuck. We, as adults, we tend to not like messiness. We like things really like in clear boxes. We like things nice and sorted and organized. And sometimes the real world is really messy, and that's not comfortable for us as adults. But kids love messy. And so this might sound like drudgery, or it might sound scary to you, but actually there are lots of interesting ways to do this kind of skill development, do this kind of knowledge development, and that it's sort of in the wheelhouse of kids, right? They like to be curious. They like to explore messy things where they don't know answers, and they're okay with that. One of the ways that we do this is game-based learning, and you're going to see sort of pictures there on the right of students actually engaging in these complex simulations that are messy. There isn't one good answer, and they love playing in that space. And all the while, they are gaining these skills through gameplay. So a little bit of how that happens with gameplay. So this is a model of game-based learning. This is my own diagram, but you might call it like sort of the magic circle of game-based learning. Any game sort of has this structure to it. So first is open-ended exploration. Students are kind of put into this world, this messy world, and within some sort of confines of gameplay. So there are game mechanics going on. They're only allowed to work within that, but they need to then be guided by the objective, whatever it is that the game is trying to get you to do. You have to make decisions. As you make those decisions, hopefully you're experiencing failure and feedback, right? So sometimes your character dies, sometimes things go wrong. That's okay in a game. It's low stakes decision making, right? You can feel free to restart the game at any point. Oh, I didn't like how that went. I learned something though about what I need to do next. And that's that corrected action. Players are going to adjust their actions based on some sort of feedback they're getting from the game. And so this cycle keeps going sort of again and again and again as students are playing the game, and they tend to get better over time, right? The more that they play and the more feedback that they get, and the more they can course correct, the better that they are going to have sort of a strategy for gameplay. So our current offerings include both digital and tabletop games that are focused on, again, these two major things, systems thinking and STEM-informed decision-making. They also are always within the context of food, energy, water, and societal systems, which we term FUSE. And they are generally used to support middle school, high school, and college coursework. So this is perfect for, I think someone had asked on the Jamboard yesterday, what materials or what curriculum or, what are you using with high school students? This would be a perfect thing to use with high school students to introduce conservation education. But it is no small feat to bring together sort of these FUSE systems, STEM-informed decision-making, and systems thinking into a game. And so there's a huge team effort behind this. So we have our game design, programming, and graphics, which are a lot of undergraduate, including Chloe, undergraduate students who are leading this development. So just an immense, tremendous lift, a lot of creativity and a lot of technical knowledge that's coming from this group. There are also graduate students that have helped in the development of these games as well and done sort of research studies alongside to see how effective this type of learning is. And then you have myself, Jenny, and an evaluation team that focus on the education and evaluation. So helping to set up additional lessons and additional like resources that will help turn this from just a game that you're playing into how can I incorporate this into an actual like learning sequence that has some sort of objective or outcome of learning at the end for students. And evaluation, obviously seeing how effective things like this are, things like the workshop to see if we are communicating the possibilities of game-based learning to our audience. And then content specialists. So all of those folks who have a deep, deep understanding of various fuse systems, various fuse topics, including things like weather, crop modeling, integrated modeling, beef, rangeland management, water, economic sustainability, all of these folks, many of them are UNL faculty or UNL staff in some way. So I want to talk about a little bit about what are the benefits of game-based learning and this approach in conservation education. So if your goal is to go from awareness to some sort of action, that what I'm hoping will happen is that, and that what the games are designed to do is that they're going to experientially introduce an unfamiliar conservation issue. And what that looks like in action is that, okay, the kid starts up the game and they say, okay, sort of in a basic tutorial or in the opening screen, it tells you like, this is the situation you're being thrust into. Here's the problem in the game and here is your objective. Okay, so they right away, they don't have to have any background knowledge of this in order to play the game. They get a little bit of knowledge and then additional knowledge is given to them kind of throughout gameplay, depending on what level they play. If they want to make things more difficult, maybe they get more information. It also offers an opportunity for a lot of low stakes decision making. So, right, like they don't have to know how to play the game to begin with, they just start playing. So there's a whole lot of, I wonder what will happen if I tried this, or I wonder if I put this strategy into play in the game, what will happen? And then lastly, and this is sort of an area that's of deep interest for myself, and I think Jenny as well, and that's that games have an incredible capacity for building empathy. And I think it's an often overlooked benefit of game-based learning is that you can also see that this is really hard without more, say it's time or money or resources or cooperation with another like player in the game. So they can start to see that in this simulated environment, this is a hard thing, but oh man, if you have conversations about how this actually might look in the real world as well, oh, all of those same challenges exist and all of these other things. Imagine how hard that must be. They must have to work with their neighbors, or how do they overcome challenges about, you know, not having enough time, not having enough money? Oh, they have to work together to do that. So there's this possibility of gaining sort of empathy by playing a role that isn't them, but also by looking at the challenges that that player is facing and how they have to overcome it in the game and how that might be similar or different in the real world. So hopefully this kind of introduction in this process, this like trajectory, takes them from some sort of, maybe they have no awareness of an issue to start with, to, okay, I suddenly have some understanding of it and I can actually see some ways that folks can take action in this space. So that gives you a brief introduction to sort of who we are, what the process is, what game-based learning is, and here is an outline of what we're going to cover today for our activities. First up, we're going to introduce I don't think anyone would say it isn't a troubling conservation issue. Then we're going to introduce two different games that you're going to have time to play. once we get through the 2 games and you sort of just get time to openly explore there, we're going to do some modeling, some systems modeling using a tool called Loopy. So again, it's a really fun, playful way to model the systems and sort of get the information that you've started to put in your head from playing these games, getting it out onto a space so you can visualize it. And then we're going to put it together. So I'm going to teach you how to use the modeling tool with just a personally meaningful system first. And then we're going to shift into, okay, what did you learn from the games and how can we model those systems? So this is sort of the outline for what it's going to look like today. So first up, a troubling conservation issue that I think we can all relate to. And this is the disappearance of temperate grasslands. So they are the most endangered and least protected ecosystems on Earth. There was this paper I went and found. If you look, this is one of those top lists you don't want to be the top of, right? No, we're number 1. You don't want to be number 1. So it's 20 to 40% of the world's land area. Less than 10% of it is protected. And the habitat conversion exceeds habitat protection by a ratio of 8 to 1. So if you'll see where that big black bar where lots and lots of it is getting converted and that little tiny white bar of how much of it is being protected. So it's the most threatened, least protected. There is some really good news though, and that is that the Nebraska Sandhills, which is nearly 20,000 square miles of these grass covered dunes covering a quarter of Nebraska, it is the largest prairie grassland ecosystem remaining in the Great Plains, and it's largely intact. And a lot of this has to do with actions by ranchers. This is a really great thing. Now, it wasn't always this way. A lot of this has been clawing back, the stability of this system through a lot of action that they've had to take. We all know the Dust Bowl happened, but we can actually keep it largely intact. But it's going to take a lot of collective effort. Why would you want to protect the grasslands? It's a leverage point. It's a tremendous leverage point in the system. So you'll see that I sort of built, this is built in Loopy. So this is built in the tool we're going to see later. But you'll see that if you have a positive impact on grassland conservation, it has this ripple effect through the system, right? So if I look at small changes in, improving grassland conservation, has all of these other really positive impacts, including protecting biodiversity and all of these different ecosystem services. Everything from air quality, water quality, providing places for recreation and ecotourism. You're making more habitat for animals of all different types, things like insects, grassland birds, large mammals. It's also providing this enormous service in terms of carbon sequestration, erosion control, nutrient cycling. So doing this one really great thing and doing, taking action in conserving grasslands has, again, this is what I'm talking about, these leverage points. It has lots of ripple effects that have positive effects throughout the system. And we're not going to introduce all of the different threats to grassland ecosystems. We're just going to talk about 2 today. And that's because each of the games that we're going to introduce sort of tackles one of these challenges. So human activity as a whole generally threatens grassland ecosystems in a lot of different ways. One of them are invasive species. And you'll see in this picture up top, I'm not going to do a ton of introduction because each of our game leaders, Jenny and Deepak, are going to lead you through more of the specific. But in this top picture, you're going to see all of these. What you're focused on for the invasive species are the woody trees. So the little tiny trees in this picture are your invasive species, right? The eastern red cedar. And then we're going to explore also overgrazing. You're going to see large patchy areas and the death of a lot of vegetation down in this lower picture. So with seeing these 2 sort of issues that we see, and we won't cover all of the other ones that are also out there. The other important piece to this is that land ownership in Nebraska is 97% private. So better land management can help this issue. And it's going, if we're going to make sort of a dent in grassland conservation, it's going to come not because necessarily of like government regulation of these lands or like the government stepping in and doing anything, but because individual landowners and land managers are going to be making decisions that either positively or negatively impact this land. So if you are ready to tackle the green glacier, which is what we term this woody encroachment or this invasion of eastern red cedar, I'm going to pass it over to Jenny Kishwani, who is going to lead you through the game Prairie Protector.
Awesome. Thanks for that setup, Erin. We're so close to playing games, so super excited to get y'all playing Prairie Protector, one of the games that we've developed, really focused on the green glacier. So this first topic that we want to talk about is this idea that Erin already talked about a little bit, where invasive species such as eastern red cedar are really a detrimental force in our native grasslands. Green glacier is kind of a fun way to think about that, where it's just this invasion of these green trees, which I think especially in a place like Nebraska, where we're all about Arbor Day and things like that, it's kind of weird to say, okay, trees are the bad guys in this situation, and we want to prevent the invasion of trees into our native grasslands. So there's lots of different ways that we can look at how to tackle.
Sorry.
You're fine, you're fine. We can look at different ways to tackle the invasion of eastern red cedar. You might have to run the slides, Erin. I'm struggling here. So a couple different ways that the invasion of the eastern red cedar is a problem is, of course, thinking about things like the impacts on native animals such as the prairie chickens and things like that, but also the impact economically on our ranchers and folks that are trying to use these native grasslands in positive ways to produce beef or other livestock in those ways. So what are the ways that we can address this invasion of eastern red cedar? We can either use mechanical tools, which is exactly what you think. You're using chainsaws, you're using big, large equipment to take down the trees physically, or prescribed burns is another option. So having fire as a tool is very powerful in that it has more of a long-term impact on the native or the invasive species, where it gets rid of not only the trees themselves, but also slows down propagation of those plants across the landscape. And so Prairie Protector uses both of these types of land management tools as options in the game for a player to use. And of course, each has its benefits and drawbacks, right? I mean, working in the real world, we know most things that are tools are going to have both positives and negatives. So for example, using mechanical removal, that's a lot of work. It takes hours and hours of time, days, to really get at a landscape that looks like this picture on the left, where you're trying to take down all of those trees and then dispose of them in some way. The other side, prescribed burn, has kind of a negative view sometimes in society. We think of wild forest fires, and that's a bad thing, but really prescribed burns in a variety of settings have been happening historically for centuries and millennia. It's really a tool that's very useful if managed properly. So we're gonna hop into Prairie Protector and let you all test this out. So we'll pop the link into the chat so you can access Prairie Protector for yourself. And when you hop into Prairie Protector, the opening screen is going to give you a couple different options. The top option is a tutorial. So if you're not very comfortable with online games and this is a little bit scary for you, I would suggest starting with the tutorial. It walks you through step by step how to choose different tools, what the different tools mean, what the goal of the game really is. So that's a good option for you if this is a little scary. If, on the other hand, you're one of those people that just likes to hop in and figure it out yourself, choose the middle option, the level select. When you click on that, there's a handful of different levels that our game designers have developed, really to teach students a variety of different gameplay scenarios. So maybe you want to start with the dense woods really hard, trying to get all of the different trees taken care of. Or maybe on the bottom, one of my favorite options is the Zen forest, where you're really trying to take care of a very aesthetically pleasing invasion of eastern red cedar. So once you hop in and are able to select the level you'd like to start with, we're just going to give you a little bit of time to dive into that and test it out. So I encourage you at this point, really just play for the fun of it. Don't focus so much on winning. Explore the space, see what you can do, see what your options are. And during this time, we're going to open up a couple breakout rooms for assistance. So main room, if you just want to stay in this space, that's really perfect. We'll just hang out here and we can play the game and just kind of silently play by ourselves. In breakout number 1, this is where you want to have a little bit more social interaction during your gameplay. So if you want to chat with one of us or chat with other people in the breakout room about what you're doing, what you're learning, where you're getting stuck, that's another option for you. Breakout room number 2, this is where Chloe's going to be hanging out. So if you just run into a hurdle and really have no idea what's going on, need to talk to somebody, maybe you're having a technical issue, hop into breakout room number 2 and we'll be able to provide some support for you there. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the breakout rooms and feel free to start playing the games. If anybody has questions right now, feel free to unmute yourself. Or if you would like to pop something in the chat, that's also an option. We have about 10 minutes right now to play the games, and then we'll bring everybody back to this main room and discuss what we learned, and then send you out with another challenge to play Prairie Protector. It looks like everybody is slowly making their way back from the breakout rooms. So how was that experience? Was the game harder than you expected, easier?
The first round went pretty well, and then I chose a different level that was way harder and lost on the second turn. So
yeah,
experience.
That happens for sure. Any other
breakout room? Like, I consider myself pretty tech savvy, so I just jumped into a level and then immediately was like, well, I need to go back to the tutorial. Like, I'm glad I did. I learned a couple of things that I didn't know, like you can drag and create larger spaces or whatnot.
Perfect. Thanks, Megan. So in our breakout room, we had a little bit of discussion about kind of how we ended up making a game for invasive eastern red cedar and what that process was like. And I thought, Ianr, it might be helpful for you to share just a little bit, if you're willing, about that talk that you heard and how they were comparing it to gameplay.
Yes, so I don't know if anyone, I am sure people in this group are definitely followers of Chris Heltzer's The Prairie Ecologist blog. And he had put up a post about how it was like Space Invaders, where it just keeps getting faster and harder, and eventually like you're going to lose. And so I remember reading that blog. We were sort of in this space on the Prairie. We have a grant funded project called the Prairie Project. And I sent the blog post to Jenny and I was like, this is like sort of a cool idea. And of course, Jenny in all her like genius was like, why don't we just build a game? And I was like, yes, let's do that. And so again, this came from a post of a real prairie ecologist who was saying like, those are the links he was seeing. And, Chris is just an amazing person, an amazing ecologist, and shares, is so generous in giving that information to the public. And so without that blog post, I don't think Prairie Protector would have ever come probably to us. So that's sort of like the little snippet of how we got involved in game-based learning around sort of Eastern red cedar invasion.
Awesome. Thanks, Erin. All right, so that first kind of try at playing Prairie Protector, again, not really focused on winning, just seeing what you can do, seeing what options are out there. So now we're gonna start over with a new game. And this time we're gonna pay a little bit more attention to the strategy that you're using, focus a little bit more on the idea of wanting to win. And so for this time, if you want, you can do a level select again and maybe choose a new level to test it out. Or if you're feeling super adventurous and want to try a custom game, this is where it gets a little bit bigger, and you can have a bigger area of land that you're working with. You can choose your map size as being small, medium, or large. You can also choose your map type as being easy, medium, or hard. So if you feel like you need additional challenge, feel free to try that. We're just going to take another about 10 minutes or so to again play through the game, but this time think about these questions on the slide. So think about which tools are you choosing to use and why are you choosing those tools? If you went through the tutorial, you learned some information about the different tools and the impacts that they have on the invasive species that you're managing. So maybe that's part of your decision, or maybe it's something you're learning just by playing the game itself. Then think about the status of the land that you're treating. Again, if you did the tutorial, you probably saw this. If you just jumped into the game, notice on the left side of the screen, it'll show some additional information about the land. So the graphics will show you if there's lots of trees or not very many trees or no trees. But if you look over at that informational panel on the left, it gives you quite a bit of additional information about what's happening with that land and helping you make those decisions of where you're placing your treatments. Then also think about the location of your treatments. Are you choosing to put all your treatments kind of spread out or in certain regions? You see this where it also mentions the idea of near or far from a neighbor. Once you get to that custom game level, there are options to add neighbors to your gameplay. I think it's pretty obvious to us that in the real world, it's not just your own decisions that you have to be playing against. You have neighbors, and what they choose to do or not do really has an impact on how you're able to take care of your land and what decisions you might need to be taking. And then finally, what's the sequence of your treatments? Are you choosing to do fire at first and then followed up by mechanical, or the opposite, or kind of a mix of both, or maybe all fire, all mechanical? Lots of different ways that you can be strategizing. But this next time we play the game, just be more intentional about thinking about what your decisions are and what you're deciding to do. Any questions about that? All right, as folks are hopping back into the main room, couple things to mention as discussion's been happening. It looks like in the main room, in the chat, all over the place, which is awesome. Love the engagement, love that folks are having cool ideas and thinking about land management in new and different ways. Couple things related to Prairie Protector that might be of use to you all. We do have, and maybe Aaron or Deepak or somebody can drop the link in the chat. We do have a tutorial that one of our developers created. That's a video. And so if you have students that would benefit from something like that, that's a resource for you to use. This is something that Connor, yep, got it up on the screen. Connor Lund, one of our original developers on the Prairie Protector game, developed this tutorial. So it's straight from the developer's perspective of how to play the game and maybe some tips and tricks that would be useful. And really it depends on the population you're working with. Sometimes this video is super boring and nobody wants to watch it, depending on the age group. Sometimes the tutorial in the game is just a little bit too much to navigate, especially with younger students. It's a lot to read. So lots of different tools that you can use to really get at the kind of intricacies of Prairie Protector to help set that up with your student populations. Also had a question, a little bit more tangential, about some of the tabletop games that our team has developed. So Aaron mentioned a little bit about that in the intro to our session. We decided not to explore those today because we're virtual and it's really hard to have a tabletop experience with folks that are all on Zoom. It is possible. We've played with some of the tabletop simulators, things like that, but didn't feel that that was a good use of our time today. If you are interested in learning more about those, we do have some materials on our website for preservation that we can share with y'all. Preservation is the most developed of our board games at the moment. We do have the start of a tabletop version of Prairie Protector. Aaron, I don't know if that's something that folks would be able to have access to at this point, or but still needs a little bit more development, as well as the tabletop version of Prairie Protector that students were working on a couple years ago. That was.
Yes, so I do somewhere have those materials. I will work on finding a link for those.
Okay, if you think it would be useful, because I know folks in different environments maybe do or don't have access to computers or ways to connect with the different materials. And again, this is a pretty rough version. It was something that we had some students that were interested in developing, and it's partially done. If it's useful to you, feel free to use it. If it's not, it's not something that, obviously we don't have it on our website. It's not super developed. Also, we have a new game that is just about to be printed for beta testing called Budlandia. Naming things is weird and hard, and they get silly names like Spudlandia. So this is more of a farming-based game. It's cooperative, so really helping students learn how to work together to grow potatoes, as well as the complex system involved with potato farming in Nebraska. So that one should be available the next couple months, as well as we're slowly working through the process of developing a supply chain game around the corn, water, ethanol, beef system here in Nebraska, especially over the past couple of years with the pandemic, seeing the impacts of things like pandemics on the supply chain, as well as other major events in the system, and how we can think about that complex system in different ways. So those are in development, not quite ready yet for release, but again, we'll share contact information and links to our website and things like that that y'all can keep an eye on, and we'll be sharing more information about that as things get developed. So, all right. Any other questions about Prairie Protector before we hop into our final discussion about your experience playing the game?
I just want to jump in real quick. I saw in the chat someone asked about contact information for who to reach out to regarding research assistance about the Eastern Red Cedars. I went ahead and tossed in our infuseunl@gmail.com email in there, but I don't know if y'all want to put in your emails as well or anything like that.
Perfect. Thanks, Chloe.
Mm-hmm.
All right, good question, Megan. So how much time to play the game in a classroom or other type of setting? Again, this is going to depend on your audience. I don't, Aaron, do you want to jump in there? It looked like you had.
So I do, only because, okay, so right now, in fact, as of tomorrow, Jenny and I were supposed to travel to Hastings to do focus groups with a middle school classroom of middle a middle school classroom that is using this in their what they call win time, what I need time. So they're using it in sort of like this gap time in their day where like they could work on anything that they need assistance with a teacher. And so Jordan Binfield is the teacher at Hastings that is helping us pilot this. He told me that he is using, so I think this is a great time. I'll tell you what resources he's using, and I will later provide you with a link. We have 4 lessons already written that you can adapt, use what you want of them. He has introduced pieces and parts of those 4 lessons over 4 class periods that are 35 minutes apiece. So they play the game, then they do some select activities from the 4 lessons that we have already written. He didn't have to write anything to use these. And then the students are going to be providing their feedback in a focus group setting. It's supposed to be tomorrow. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, just so you know, at least that's how Jordan has set it up. I'm sure you could do it a bunch of different ways, but he's doing it in approximately 2 hours, playing the game and doing some lessons with middle school. So I do want to point out, and the only way I'm going to be able to do it is to sorry, I apologize. I hate skipping ahead here, but I feel like it's a really good time. So at the very end, we are going to have a resources page, but I did want to point out, and I'm going to drop this in the chat, partly because given the, oh my goodness, Aaron, given the keynote from yesterday, I think it's really important to talk about the fact that one of the 4 lessons we have built for Prairie Protector is looking at indigenizing this space. Indigenous fire, like the use of fire as a land management, has been done by indigenous peoples across the globe forever. And we have a lesson about it. And so if you want to look at that, there's also an amazing article that's referenced in here by Robin, is it Wall Kimmerer? And that is a fantastic introduction to fire as a land management tool used by indigenous peoples. And so just know that if that keynote had interesting, and I know one of the main questions people had yesterday was, how do I start doing this? This would be a really great way to start doing this using an existing lesson. So I just want to put a plug out there for people that were interested in that yesterday and would like to try out something. But these are the 4 lessons, introducing it, which is essentially what you're doing today with us. This is basically the lesson plan. Have them start just playing, have them look at strategy, and then we are going to, in our last activity right here, talk about your strategies and sort of what gameplay experience was like. So I'm going to stop there.
Awesome.
So
Stop.
I was just curious, that last slide you had up, where can we access those?
Say that again.
So that last slide you just had up that had all the lessons on them, where can we access that?
So that is the link that I dropped into the chat, that go.unl.edu/projectacre. That will get you to our resources page for these 2 games. Any other games that are in development, if you have a question about or you're interested in, feel free to just reach out at that Infuse link that Chloe shared earlier. We'd be happy to talk to you about other things as well. Okay.
Any other questions while Aaron's bringing back our slides?
Okay.
Perfect. Thanks, Marissa. Yes, click on the Prairie Protector link at Project Acre.
And the reason that I am giving these in go.unl.edu links is because we are building a brand new website right now. Eventually, if you only save these IANR communities links, those will be broken eventually. But if you use the go.unl.edu/projectacre, I am going to update those to our new website as soon as our website goes live. And so just keep those go.unl.edu links, and those will be the good links. So
The good links. Thanks, Erin. So you can tell we get pretty excited about the stuff that we get to do. So thanks for joining us in our excitement. All right, so you've all had a second chance to play the game now, develop your strategy a little bit more, think about kind of what you're doing and why. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to open the breakout rooms again and send folks to a new breakout room. Maybe you can meet some new people. There'll be about 5 or so folks in your breakout room. In your breakout room, you can discuss your different strategies. So talk as a group, what worked, like what didn't work? Are there things that you wish you could do different, like were different about the game? Just in general, what do you think about the game? Is this something you could see yourself using in some of your activities? Is it maybe interesting, but not a good fit for you? What other resources would you like to have? All that kind of thing. Just spend the next, we'll do 10 minutes again, just because I think it's going to take a little time to kind of get a little bit deeper and comfortable with your group.
Folks, I think we're ready to get started again. It is just past 10:35. So hope you enjoyed a little bit of time away from the computer. And so we'll just give everybody about 30 seconds to kind of get their attention back on our Zoom meeting. Aaron, do you want to go ahead and share the PowerPoint slides, and I will try to control it from my end.
Sure. Okay. Let's do it.
All right. All right, folks, let's go and get started now. Again, as a reminder, we are going to now be entering a second one of our games that we've developed that we wanted to share with you. And again, I agree. Thank you for all those amazing comments. I just want to reflect on one in particular about just the importance of, like, you know, knowing kind of the gameplay yourself if you're an educator. But one thing I will tell you is that our youth, this stuff comes for so many of them. They pick up on these game mechanics so quickly. Chloe and I have been a few weeks, about a month or two ago, we were in Lincoln Northeast. They have this Tuesday after school program here. We just showed up with some laptops, and kids just kind of randomly stopped by and started playing these games. And it's amazing how quickly they were able to figure out, like, okay, this is what I need to do to beat this particular barrier. So I think you'll be surprised quite pleasantly on how some of our younger learners can really take through this game. All right, so let's tackle Overgrazing through Apocalypse 2050, which is our next game that we're going to talk about. So why do we care about overgrazing? Well, obviously, it's kind of a big deal if you are managing a herd of cattle. It is a significant investment of time and labor to move animals around. So, but overgrazing is really important because we know from research that if you're managing land and you have cattle grazing on the land, you really need to be concerned about regrowth potential, right, of the grasses on the land. And so sometimes this is kind of called like taking care of your solar panels, essentially, because these plants really need a certain amount of exposure to the sun. And so overgrazing really impacts not just short-term, but long-term regrowth potential. The other reason why overgrazing is kind of a big deal is because of the increased opportunity for erosion on the lands, partly because of, you know, destruction of root structure. If that regrowth doesn't happen in a timely manner, and we know that there's certain particular land areas that are more vulnerable to erosion just because of the surrounding land use, whatever the watershed looks like. And so really thinking about long-term erosion control is important. And the other aspect about overgrazing is just really thinking about soil compaction. And so when you start to have overgrazing happen and you start to have portions of your land where the grass isn't readily there, what will the animals do? They're likely to congregate in certain places, right? And by doing that, you have that additional trampling of the soil because you have more animals in a smaller area. So there are really concerns about soil compaction as well. And so, the research has a lot of interesting aspects and approaches to, what kind of grazing rotation strategies you can do. There's a really neat extension publication in this space that I'll just drop in the chat here that talks a little bit about, the different grazing rotation strategies that landowners, farmers typically will use. And again, there are cost benefits associated with each of these, lots of factors in play. Thinking about, how much labor you have available, because again, it is an investment in time and resources to move animals around. Obviously, the size of herd, what is your land availability, and what are some of the other uses of that land, right? And what are the current uses, and what do you anticipate being future uses of those lands? So a lot of those factors really play a role in grazing rotation. So what we wanted to do was thinking about how can we capture this and talk a little bit about grazing and how that relates to cattle and the amount of weight that they gain, and try to put that in the form of an engaging game. And so what we created was Apocalypse, which was we received funding from the National Science Foundation to kind of develop some immersive decision-making games that are related to, broadly speaking, our agro ecosystem here in Nebraska. And our goals were really to sort of get students thinking about, what are those cause and effects that you see in the system, and how can you make data-informed decisions? We also wanted to introduce concepts of sustainability as well as awareness of STEM careers. So on some of the links that we've shared with you before, you'll find, again, resources on this. One of the things I will tell you is what kind of makes this approach unique, and this applies to Prairie Protector as well, is that we've really tried to leverage research-based data and models. So in the case of Apocalypse, we've actually gone out and found what's a good research model that helps us predict what might happen in these natural systems. And then we've tried to develop a game that then interacts with those research models. And so that kind of what makes sort of this approach rather unique is because we are trying to intentionally engage disciplinary experts. So some of the models, for example, that have gone into this game are actual research models that scientists use in their day-to-day research, right? So if we're thinking about trying to predict crop growth or animal weight gain when they're feeding on grass, we went out and found a research model and a data set that scientists are using currently. So let's go ahead and get started with Apocalypse 2050. I will walk us through briefly what you might see when you log in, and our process will be very similar like we did with the previous game, where we'll have a couple of breakout rooms available. So if you just want to play by yourself, you'll be in the main room. If you want to talk with others, there'll be the breakout room 1. And if you want really help from Chloe, you'll be in breakout room 2. So to get us started, what we'll have you do is go to this website and click Scenario Select. And what you'll see is 3 scenarios in front of you. We actually have 3 different management games. Today, we're going to talk about the grass-fed beef scenario, because I think it really applies and ties well with sort of the land conservation aspects that we've talked about earlier today. But we do have a decision-making scenario for irrigation management, as well as a life cycle analysis scenario that talks about sort of the impact of fertilizer use and what are the environmental implications for that. So when you get into the website, you'll click on the grass-fed beef scenario. And really the game objective for a player is to implement a grazing rotation strategy that maximizes productivity. And so while our main productivity is the amount of weight gain that animals that your herd is seeing, while sustaining the vegetation over time. So you're given 2,000 acres that is split into multiple pastures. So we've got 8 fields for you to manage. And you've got 400 cattle that are split into 4 herds. Right? So your idea is that you're managing and moving these 4 herds across those 8 pastures, right? And so that's kind of our game objective. So when you enter the gameplay, this is kind of what your user interface is going to look like. So I will just familiarize with you kind of what things are. So these green boxes represent the 8 different pastures, and you can see there's herds of cattle in each of these pastures. In order to move them, it's simple as clicking on the herd and just dragging it onto another field. You'll see some information about each pasture. So when you click on the eye across each, it'll give you kind of what the vegetation levels are, what the average weight of the cattle are on that particular field. You'll also see some information if there are any cattle deaths happening. The other thing you'll see is this bar underneath each pasture that will change color based on the vegetation. You'll actually see the color of the field changing to a more brown as more and more vegetation is being eaten. So that'll give you a clue that you probably want to make a change and move cattle away from that particular pasture. But while that's happening, you'll also see the bar change, and that's intentional because we wanted to make sure this game was accessible, and if somebody had issues detecting one color over the other, they could actually look at the bar as well. The other thing you'll see is a task list at the top. We've intentionally integrated some characters, some non-playing characters in the game that you can learn more about what you're doing. So for example, you may want to choose to speak to the animal nutritionist to learn more about cattle grazing. And this is where we're intentionally integrating awareness of STEM careers that are related to this system. Sometimes you'll see this call an expert button flash. That means it's an opportunity for you to interact with that non-playing character. At times, this would be required. So if you, for some reason, move your cattle around and you hit next month and it doesn't move, that means you're required to do something. The other thing I'll tell you is occasionally you'll see that your windmill might be broken. And so you'll kind of want to click on that and fix it, and a mini game pops up, right? So with that, what we'll do is go ahead and have you kind of same thing. Let's stay in the main room. If you want to just play, get into Breakout 1. If you'd like to play and chat with others on what you're experiencing. And if you want to get into Breakout 2, that's where you can engage with Chloe, because if you need help or have a specific question or want to learn more about kind of the mechanics of the gameplay. Folks, welcome back. I'm going to try to shut my game down because you realize you'll keep hearing the cows mooing in my background. That is something that when we do this game virtually, you kind of have to think about with your learners. There is a setting where you can turn off the game sounds as well. You might have discovered that on your own. So the one thing that we also wanted to share with you, Chloe, our lead game developer, made a really neat tutorial on kind of tips and tricks of the game and how you can strategies to kind of engage with this particular game. Again, it's a great resource. It's not currently yet on the website. We will be uploading it onto that website, but this video is available. So what we'd like to do now is just sort of think about kind of what you learned from the game, what you what was some of the initial thoughts, and think about the strategy that you used as you were moving. What made you decide to move certain animals to what field? What didn't? The other thing I want you to think about is what would you change if you played this again, right? If you had to play this again, what kinds of things would you change? What would you also think is missing in terms of making management decisions? I think we'd love to kind of hear that aspect as well. And as you're doing that, feel free to keep playing and engage with each other. So I'm going to turn back control now, or if somebody wants to create those breakout rooms, let me know. Thanks, Chloe.
For sure, for sure. Hey y'all,
Hi.
how's it going?
Good. That was fun to play for sure.
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I liked the windmill fixing. I like the little like tiny bit of like engineering that's
I
required.
think I think I made the breakout rooms wrong. It looks like they're closing them to reopen them. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay.
So, okay. I may or may not see y'all later.
Okay.
Did you?
Whoops.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right, let's try this again. There you go.
Are the rooms open now? It's still showing me the option to open them.
Oh, yes.
Ah, there
Sorry.
we go. Okay. Hello, hello. How's it going, everyone?
Good. Good. Is everyone here?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like everyone's in a room now.
My cows are still mooing. Hold on 1 second.
I thought that was really cool. Sorry, go Kelly.
Oh, no. Yeah, you go ahead.
I just was getting really zoned into it. I don't know why. It was cool to see all the different mechanics working. Like you could see the vegetation lowering while the cattle were gaining weight. And then the scenario where we changed it, they changed and said, how about we do more cattle on less pasture so you have more to rotate? And it kind of got me thinking, you know, if that's super viable, because I noticed that when we did that, had bigger herds on each pasture, the vegetation, the rate that it was decreasing in vegetation was a lot faster, which makes sense. But just really cool to kind of play all those out.
Oh, yeah. It took me a second to figure out just kind of like how the game would work from month to month. But when I figured that out, I got really zoned into. One thing I was thinking about while playing it, I know that in the West, especially, there's some land management techniques where they try to rotate grazing and use fire as a way to increase forbs for pollinators. So I have no idea how you would even go about adding that to the game, but I think that could be an interesting aspect too, like just focusing on like, in terms of overgrazing, like if the forbs are overgrazed too. That was just a passing thought while I was playing.
Yeah, we definitely don't have anything as detailed as that implemented, unfortunately.
Right.
About as far as it goes is that if you do have the pastures get overgrazed, it just takes them a very long time to grow back.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, there's sort of like a bell curve for grass regrowth, where if there's already a lot of grass, it doesn't grow much because there's not like room for more. And if there's very little grass, it doesn't grow very much because there's not much of it to reproduce in the first place. But in the middle, you can get a pretty decent amount of growth where, you know, you've still got a good amount of stuff that can spread and a decent amount of space for it to spread too.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that's super cool. Yeah, I just got to think about that. The other component I thought maybe it plays into it, I'm not sure, but if it gives you the options of, okay, well, if it works just to have bigger herds on less pastures, let's do that. But then you also have, you know, when you have more cattle in one space, it's like there can be disease or other kind of pressures like that. And so kind of balancing the environmental pressure of moving them. Should we have a bigger herd on a smaller pasture and rotate them more frequently? But then that could add some stress and some energy reduction, you know, I don't know, just all those components. Maybe that's in there too.
I don't think we really have sickness anymore. We did
Okay.
at one point. And I'm not sure why we decided to remove it, but that happened before I was in charge of
Oh.
Apocalypse. So, but we do have stuff that is, especially when you start getting your fields really low on vegetation, some of them can start to die off from starvation, because basically what we have it do is we check to see, okay, what is the most weight gain we can get for the cattle, and if there's not enough vegetation for all the cattle to gain weight, then some of them will just meet their survival needs, but other ones will die off. It doesn't happen very often, but it can technically.
I did like there was kind of like that stakes in the game. Just as I was playing, I noticed in the corner it was like cattle death 0. I'm like, oh no.
Yeah, that's good. This is a detail, but I absolutely love, I'm obsessed with the transition of the month with the full moon. I thought that was really cool. Very
Excellent.
visually appealing. I love
I'm
it.
glad you like that. Yeah.
I would agree.
We had all of the, so back when this was a 3D game, we had all of these like environmental effects and cool camera angles for the month swaps. And that was probably one of the harder ones to transition over to 2D while still making it look a little interesting. So I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah.
No, yeah. Felt like
I
it
mean,
increased the suspense a little.
Also, and it just ties back to like what a month actually is. You know, it's like there are cyclical patterns in nature and phenology, and oh, that's kind of cool to show that.
Yeah.
That's just me being nerdy, but I like it.
That's
That's
why
all
we're
good.
here.
Yeah. Thanks for your work, Chloe, and thanks for sharing that with us today. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, it looks like they're about to yank us back out of here. So see y'all back in the main room.
All right.
All right, folks. Well, welcome back. So before we move on to kind of the next stage, wanted to check in on folks, just some general kind of high points, any major themes in the conversations in your room about sort of how, you know, strategies in this game, or maybe even how you might deploy it, or things that you liked about it. Feel free to use the chat, or if somebody's really dying to share out, feel free to unmute yourself as well.
So in our group, we all did the easy level to dip our toes in. Did anybody try the harder levels, or what do the harder levels kind of bring in as additional education?
Good point. Chloe, do you want to kind of take on that idea of kind of in this particular scenario, how the different level hardness play out?
Yeah, give me just a moment to get it pulled up on my computer here. Hopefully y'all don't mind getting a sort of behind the scenes view here. Got to get Unity spun up.
So while Chloe's getting that done, I see a comment there about the discussion of wanting technology adaptations into the game, and that's a really, really neat point. I think that was sort of some things we were considering in that 3D game as well. But and I think the good thing about this approach and having a web-based 2D game, whether it's for Prairie Project or this, as we make more modifications and changes, you as educators or end users don't have to worry about finding a new version, because they'll always be on this website as sort of a new version that's accessible through the web page.
I know one comment in our group was that on the easy level, you can't really kill cows. And so that was just one comment that somebody came up with was, I guess I'm a good farmer. So.
Yes.
Is it accessible on a phone? I mean,
Currently, it is not smartphone compatible, but it is tablet compatible. So it's just a matter of kind of like how we, gameplay mechanics in terms of what's doable or not. I think one of the things that we've made sure is that it is sort of browser compatibility is there. So if you've got a Chromebook that works, if you've got an Apple or a PC, so we kind of wanted to make it platform independent to some extent.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen here? Okay, so you're getting a bit of a behind the scenes view here, but basically, okay, remind me what the question was that I was answering with this. Sorry.
Just kind of how do the different difficulty levels play out?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So it's actually pretty easy to see once you have them all unlocked. You need to complete a difficulty level in order to unlock the next one. I have some handy little tools to just unlock them all at once. But so the parameters of each difficulty level are also just listed right here along when you hover over them. Unfortunately, they won't display until you've unlocked them. But basically what will happen when you go on to harder difficulties is you'll get more cattle. They'll start out a little heavier and the pipe minigame will be a little bit harder. And then when you go up to the hard difficulty, you'll have 6 and 7 herds for each respective part of the scenario. So you end up with significantly more stuff to manage, and you have to think a lot harder about where to put the heaviest herds, since the vegetation consumption is correlated with the weight of the herd on the pasture. Additionally, you can also make additionally, you can also make a custom game here where you can set all these numbers for yourself. But yeah, without having all this stuff unlocked on the website, I just needed to spin it up in Unity real quick. So,
all right, thank you, Chloe. So in the interest of time, I think we want to move on to sort of how can we pair these games with a with a kind of a learning tool. So we're going to talk a little bit about systems modeling and how we can leverage models and model building to really take advantage of some of these educational games that we have. So I want to start off by just kind of sharing my experiences, because that's kind of some of the research I do. Is I kind of build conceptual models and then operationalize them for my research. So sort of my experience is thinking about, okay, how do we model the interactions that we're seeing in agricultural systems? And so there is this really interesting saying that all models are wrong, but some models are useful. And I think that's important for us to recognize that the reason we have a model is because we're trying to do our best to capture what's happening in the physical world. And a lot of those models are based on assumptions. And it's really important for us to then pause and ask ourselves what assumptions that we're making and how do those influence the models that we have. And it's a really great way to get students thinking about the physical world that they're interacting with, right? Through this model. Okay, what assumptions are at play? Is it capturing what you actually see? So there's this idea of like comparing and contrasting what we observe versus what the game is telling us. And in that process, a lot of learning happens. And so that's really important for us to think about. And so when we think about models from an educational perspective, it's really helpful to have some really neat tools that we can use when working with young learners. And so I'm going to pass it on to Aaron, who's going to show us a really interesting tool called Loopy that is fantastic. I've used it for the college students that I work with in classroom spaces. And so I think you'll find that it pairs really well with the games that we have talked about thus far.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Deepak. So Deepak talked about this quote a little bit and the fact that, all models are wrong, but some are useful because they're simplified. They're intentionally simplified. And so the nice thing about a lot of these games is that they are also intentionally simplified. And you can lead to this conversation about models and how they're like games, because the underlying models that are running these games are also simplified. So you're leaving out certain things on purpose, right? But that you can just always leave that disclaimer that everything is more complex than we're going to talk about, but that's okay. We're doing this to simplify it so that you get some like basic concepts. And so the nice thing is with Loopy, and if someone on our team can drop in the go.unl.edu/Loopy tool link into the chat, you can actually go to Loopy. It is a tool that is really easy to quickly kind of sketch out and you'll see it sort of in this icon here, these little bubbles, which are your components. And then you can draw little relationships, which is just an arrow with either a plus or a minus sign in it. And then you'll press play and watch sort of a model come about. So these are conceptual models or mental models of how you think things are connected. But there's also sort of this like quantitative aspect where the little amount inside the bubble either grows or shrinks depending on what's happening there. So I am going to eventually lead you through a little baby tutorial, and we're going to do it really quickly. But first, I want you to know that you can use this tool no matter what system you're looking at. It doesn't have to be about grassland conservation, or it doesn't have to be about agroecosystems. You can literally use this modeling tool with anything that has a system of interconnections. We are going to start by modeling a very familiar system. Hopefully this isn't a bummer to anyone, but this is how I got started using Loopy in 2020. Was that I wanted to like play with this, but I wanted to do it in a way that was super accessible. And the easiest way to do that is to pick a system that you're very like intimately familiar with, rather than trying to do it with content you're not familiar with. So I asked myself this question in like April of 2020, which is, what if you could draw a model of how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted or continues to impact your life? And then I started drawing out like my little elements. So I started off with, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic. What was it doing to my existence, my little ecosystem? This is a great just starter exercise. We've done it with students in middle school, in high school. Deepak has mentioned we do this with college students. This is a great reflective exercise to see if you can kind of examine like a self-awareness of your own systems and the interactions that are happening within. So if you want to go on Loopy, I'm going to actually. So this is what the web page looks like. If you haven't already found it, you can scroll down to this make a model from scratch. So I'm going to show again, I'm going to slow down in case people aren't looking at the screen right now. So make a model from scratch. If you click on that, it's going to give you sort of a starter model. And I'm just going to give you like the 2-minute starter version of this. So over here on the left are a set of 4 tools. That's all you're going to need to use. I can use the little eraser to get rid of the starter model. Anytime I want to make a new component, you can make a circle. It can be a real ugly circle, like barely a circle, and it will turn it automatically into a circle for you. As soon as you have at least 2 circles, you can start adding in connections. So if all you have is like 1, it doesn't connect to anything. But as soon as you have like 2, you can start connecting them to one another. Every one of these components, you can give a name, you can change what color it is, you can change the start amount. So you can change sort of features of each and every component. Once you make little connections, you can either make it a plus sign or a minus sign, and you just do that by clicking the little button here. The nice way to do this is to think to yourself. So say I make this, I'm actually going to get rid of this one. And I'm going to use a good example from myself from my pandemic like modeling. And that was something I found was that I was experiencing a lot of anxiety, and that led to a lot of doom scrolling. And then a lot of doom scrolling led to a lot more anxiety. So if I make this really simple feedback loop and I press play, you can click either the up or the down arrow. Obviously pandemic, my anxiety was going up. And you can watch this system in action, okay? So you can build any system that you want, any of these connections and how they're sort of connected. So that's the very first thing I want you to do. This just gave you a really quick, like how you can use these. The text tool, if you wanted to do comments, the little hand tool, if you want to move these around, if you want to make a delay, like make this take a really long time, you can do it that way. And then if you want to get rid of something, just click your eraser. So that's a really basic tutorial to get you started. The very first thing, again, you're just going to go in and make your best first model. It's just an initial model. There's nothing right or wrong about it. Just your first idea of to answer this question. Can you draw a model of how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted your life? start really simple. Just start with basic cause and effect. You can draw a circle and label it with like spread of COVID-19, and then think about effects. And basically you're going to make new circles and draw out interactions to those. So maybe it's spread of COVID-19, what happened to school closures? Maybe it's like what happened to my work life? You know, do I have more events? Do I have fewer events? Maybe it's about your emotional eating. That's one thing that ended up in my model. Like I ate a ton as soon as the pandemic happened, right? So any components that you want to add into your model, and then how is it when this goes up, does it go up or does it go down? Those are your basic two options. If it's an up, it's a plus sign. If it goes down, it's a minus sign. Once you have sort of basics, you can look for a chance to add in a feedback loop. This, in my opinion, is when these models get to be really fun, is when you could start adding in feedback loops that are either a reinforcing feedback loop, like the one over here on the left, or a balancing feedback loop, like the one on the right. If you watch the behavior, you'll notice that the reinforcing feedback loop, it's like a vicious cycle that keeps growing and growing, right? So one thing goes up and that leads to the other thing going up, and then this keeps happening forever, like stuff just going out of control. Balancing feedback loops are more like a wave where there's something that goes up, but then that's balanced as it's brought back down, right? So there's this up, up, down, down, up, up, down, down behavior that happens in a balancing feedback loop. See if there's anything in your system that can be a feedback loop. Once you have a basic model that you're happy with, even if it just has spread of COVID-19 and a couple of elements and maybe one feedback loop, press play and watch sort of how the system behavior functions. An important reflection question I had for myself when I started doing this is I would build a model and then I would press play, and what I thought would happen did not happen. And so I would have to make adjustments to my model to more closely match the reality of what I wanted it to look like in my head, but that something about the way I built it wasn't working, you know, on the screen. So what can you change about your model or adjust to make it more closely resemble reality? What can you improve? Maybe you look at it and say, oh, I forgot this really important component. And if I just added that, it would make it so much closer to reality. So again, this should be something playful. There's no right or wrong. This is just about looking at an initial model, watching it sort of happen and reflecting on whether there's anything you want to change about it. Amber, really great comment. How fascinating, examining your own systems. Very cool. I agree. This was me like all of April and May of 2020. I just was like building little system models of everything. I loved it. So I'm gonna like stop talking for a moment. Is there anyone who has a question? You can either drop it in the chat or just unmute yourself and let me know if you're running into anything. Another question, this is such an incredible tool. Can anyone access and use this? Yes, absolutely. It is totally free. It is available at this website. Also, Chloe and the developer team are working on changing some aspects because this is an open source like software. So they are also looking at making sort of edits that as we've played with it, we wish it had this functionality or that functionality. So Chloe and the team are actually making some of those edits, and hopefully we will have our own sort of like version of Loopy. Excellent. I see a couple more thumbs up. Awesome. So once you sort of have, the only reason I do this first activity is so that you can sort of play with the interface. You can sort of play with the tool. It's not so that I teach you any new content, so to speak. It's just to give you some familiarity in using the tool. Like, how does the like little drawing tool work? How does the little hand work? How do I erase things? How do I change what they look like? If you're going to use this with students, it doesn't have to be this activity, but do something that introduces the tool first. Because it is if you just launch students into like content or a system that they aren't familiar with, this is a lot harder. And so that's what we're going to do next, is we're going to now apply the Loopy tool to what you've learned about grassland conservation and sort of through the games. But start off with an activity like this if you're going to plan to use it. It can feel off topic, but what you're really doing is teaching them how to use the tool before you're going to ask them to use the tool with new content. So you'll see my little starter model. I loved like building one that was somewhat complex, but not overwhelmingly complex, and just watching and then asking myself, like, what do I notice and what do I wonder about my system? So obviously what drew a lot of attention for me was like this connection between anxiety and doom scrolling. And I could suddenly start thinking about, okay, if this is a system I have control over, what could I change about this system to like break up that relationship that's an unhealthy, bad relationship, right? So I brought in things like talking more with my friends, or maybe connecting with like game night, doing other healthy things. And so again, having students play with this allows them to see systems as changeable and not static things that are always going to operate this way, and that they have some control in a case where oftentimes we feel very out of control right now about a lot of things. So once you start looking at, you know, the system is changeable, there are some elements of the system you won't be able to change, right? But there are places where you do have that, and those points are called leverage points. So you can start talking with students about like, where is a leverage point in this? Well, I can do lots of things by adding bubbles. Like, you know, I don't have to read scary news all the time. I don't have to emotionally eat. I can replace some of those things with other behaviors, like talking with friends or something like that. So again, looking for those points where you have some sort of control in the system, and you can make it a small change that has ripple effects. So the last thing we're going to do, and we will only have probably about 15 minutes total. So I realize this is going to be like a really fast experience, but I want you to erase your model or start a new one in Loopy. And I want this one to be, what did you learn, or what's the system that you saw in action about grassland conservation? Or maybe it's about, you know, a grass-fed beef scenario. So think back to the play of the two games of Agpocalypse and of Prairie Protector. Start bringing in elements that model the interactions that happen in these grasslands, and just based on what you learn to play, learn through your gameplay. So create an initial system, and I want to give you probably about 3 to 5 minutes to do that. So again, start thinking about what are some of the components and how are they connected to one another. And we're going to take 3 to 5 minutes to do that. All right. So we've had just a couple of quick minutes. Again, if you need help getting started, another prompt that you can use is think back earlier to our other activities. Start with a cause and just effects. So start with that linear relationship first. There's this leads to this, and this leads to this. And then you can build in feedback loops once you sort of get the basics of your system built. Again, same reflection. Did your system, like once you have a model that you're happy with, press play, watch how it functions. Did your system behave the way you thought it would? What did it get right? What could be improved? What's it missing? And always remember, we intentionally sometimes simplify models. It's okay if it doesn't have every single component and every single interaction in it. I think the point, at least of mine, was to gain some sort of insight into the system by mapping it out and watching the behavior sort of unfold. So press play, reflect a little bit. What are you seeing happen? What parts of the model are attracting your attention? What do you look at and go like, that doesn't seem quite right? Is it because of something, the way that you built it? Or is that actually what's happening? And it's like attracting your attention for that reason. And the last thing that I want us to do is, and if I can have some sort of leadership help on this, we're going to go into quick breakout rooms in these last like 6 minutes, 5-6 minutes, before we get to eval for the workshop. And I want you to discuss like how was this modeling experience? Did you feel like something was missing in your system model? What did you intentionally leave out? What did you have to leave out? Could you add other things to make it more like the real world? And then like, could you make this, we could really zoom in on like the ranch or on the prairie, but you could also look at like what is happening outside the scope of that immediate like geographic area that impacts the system, right? So what's happening at the grocery store, or what's happening in a supply chain, or what's happening to fertilizer and corn production, something like that, where what are the big upstream or downstream impacts that are having an impact on the system? So if someone from the leadership team can do breakout rooms, awesome.
Rooms are open.
Awesome. So if you want to just talk about that for 5 minutes. Wonderful. So I hope that everyone had a chance to sort of have I know it was a quick discussion and there's so much more we could have talked about. I feel like this tool like opens up educators' minds so much. Like, this was awesome. And I've yet to like talk to an educator group where they aren't like, this is amazing. I want to use this immediately with everything that I do. That's awesome. If you have sort of a big takeaway or something you heard in your group that you want to share out, please drop it in the chat. I feel like those are so like affirming for us as a leadership team to see what you're getting out of this and what your groups talked about, because we can't be in all the breakout rooms. So if you could just take like 2 minutes and put a big takeaway that you had in your group or something that was talked about that, or maybe you didn't get to talk about it because it was such a short group, something, and drop it in the chat. While you're doing that, Deepak did share this really nice thing in the comment that I want to make sure that we share out because I forgot to cover it, which is that you can make a link to your loopy using the tools on the right side of the screen. It could be submitted to you like as homework. It can be shared with others to remix. So there are ways to share loopies with one another. You just have to click that that part and I will show you where it's at. So over here, you can either save it as a link to open it. So maybe a student doesn't get done with it and they want to come back to it. You can save it as a file. You can load from that file. You can also just save it as a link, literally copy paste that link and drop it in either an email or wherever you want to drop it. And it is like a clickable link that will open up your exact model for someone else. You can also embed them on a website. I've done this in like Google Sites where you can just like build a free website, and that's really fun too, to have like a remixable model. So just an FYI. I'm going to take a look in the chat. It can go from just one concept to holy cow, this is a beast of its own. Yes, that comment, absolutely. Great team building and bonding activity. I love it. Empathy builder, learn how your action impact others. Yes, this has great connections to SEL. All of us could be like really benefiting from a lot more talking about that side of it, and students will as well. Yes, practice with it without concepts, like without new concepts first. Absolutely. Different ways you can use it, staff training, team bonding. So some people thought that writing out your cause and effects or having a table before we make our system and loopy might work better in a classroom setting. There are certainly adaptations that you may want to use as an educator to structure some of this. I also am a big advocate though for like kind of give some point for open play. You may give them open play and then say, okay, and now we're going to do this and provide some structure. Students will want to do like free exploration anyway. Structure it so that they have that and get it, like, I don't want to say out of their system, but so that they get an opportunity to do that. And then they're much more willing to sort of be guided to do something a little more structured. Yes, agency, hope. I love it. When we're talking about these big challenges, seeing that you can change a system, seeing that you can take a small action in one part of the system and impact a bigger system is so empowering. Like the tool, but also felt it might be helpful to have a breakdown. And again, some of this is taking time as an educator to become familiar with the tool. It is a brand new tool. So if you've never used it before, you will have to take some time to play with it. I did that for like 2 months. And so like just playing with it. It wasn't for any particular purpose. It was just goofing around with it, trying to be like, oh, what happens if I have 2 plus signs or 2 negative signs? Did that work out the way I thought it would? Maybe yes, maybe no. Yes, and how you can do it with all kinds of content, including things like into a webology program, things like food chains that are linear. Anything that's not linear is really nice with this. So great thoughts on all of that. I'm super excited that you've kind of given me all of this ideas for us to play with and things that you've taken away. That's really, like I said, very affirming for us as leaders in this to like hear sort of your direct feedback. So thank you. So sort of as our wrap up, we have evaluation, and Jenny is going to share about a fellowship opportunity, but I want to end with this sort of slide to wrap up sort of what we were trying to do today. And that is, if our goal is conservation action, really having students see that they can make some sort of meaningful change in a system. And these pictures are from Chris Heltzer and from the Nature Conservancy. Of like a kid actually snipping, eastern red cedar or spreading seed to like, restore a prairie. If that's your goal, consider starting with just basic awareness of the issue. They may live in an area that they don't have any clue this is even an issue that they could impact. Give them low stakes ways to start making decisions. I would say that game-based learning is a good option. But there are certainly other low stakes decision-making ways that you could introduce this as well. And finally, empathy building. I think if anything, the pandemic has really shown me just how valuable like empathy is in these big systems where we really need to like care for others. And that game-based learning can really be a way to build that in a way that's very accessible and fun for kids. It doesn't have to feel like drudgery. With that, I've already shared in the chat, but if we want to drop this in there again, go to unl.edu/Project Acre. So our team is known as Project Acre. That will have the games, both Prairie Protector and Apocalypse. As new games are added, they will be there as well. It has existing lesson plans that you can take and adapt, or you can use as is. There's also additional resources that I'm going to be adding, and I have my to-do list to add the tutorial for Apocalypse, but things like videos, tutorials, essays, easy to read summaries of the research literature. You can explore sort of that additional resources for those, and maybe that will be helpful in using this in whatever program you're going to be like integrating this into. And then Loopy has that go.unl.edu/Loopy tool. You can also go to that ncase. That's where it's directing you to. The ncase.me/Loopy address. That's the same one. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Jenny Kishwani, who's going to tell you a little more about a fellowship opportunity if you think you're wanting to use this in your at your site.
Awesome. Thanks, Erin. Really appreciate everybody's feedback today. This is beyond useful for us. The more we can hear from folks that actually
potentially could use this with their students or with community members, the better it is for us, because then we can make our things better. So fellowship opportunity, would love to get you all involved in bigger, broader ways. So if you decide after today that you would like to implement some of these resources with your students, whether that's formal, informal, after school, student clubs, whatever that looks like for you, we would love to support that work. So implement something with students. If you would like to write a reflection, we would give you some structure for what that looks like, really about a page long, telling us more about the students that you're interacting with, who they are, age levels, things like that. And then what worked well, what didn't work well, what did they learn, what did you learn, what did you wish was better, things like that. Writing reflection like that would make you eligible for $250. I sound like a game show host now, but that is our thanks to you for implementing things and providing that feedback in a written form that we can then use to improve our materials. There's also an option if you're super inspired and want to make this your own and submit your lesson plans, things like that, that depending on quality and things like that, of course, we have a little bit of guidance that we need to adhere to for our materials, but assuming it's something that we could put on our website, we would love to support that work as well. So that's worth $500. So opportunities to earn some money for implementing the materials that we've presented today. Anything from Prairie Project, Agpocalypse, Loopy, ways that you see to implement that with your student populations. Love to support that. If you're interested in learning more, please reach out to me. I have my email on the slide. All of this is grant funded. And so because of that, there's a fairly tight deadline that things would have to be submitted to us by July 1st in order to use up grant funds that will be expiring soon. If you are connected to the university in any way, that money would go to your cost object or a cost object that you have access to. If you are not in the university, this would just come as a check directly to you. So if you want to use this for purchasing supplies for your programming, things like that, free to do that, or it's just money in your pocket too, either way. So limitations based on the grant funding, but those are definitely options. Happy to discuss them with you all. So, all right, all we have left is evaluation, right? So if somebody wants to drop the link to the evaluation in the chat, love to hear more about your experience, what you learned. Again, we're driven by the research and evaluation side of this as well. So any feedback that we get from you all is super helpful. I know the conference is also doing an evaluation of our work as well. So this is a separate opportunity to provide some feedback. Oh, Aaron, Deepak, Chloe, anything else you'd like to share as we wrap things up? Awesome. Well, this was a lot of fun. Thank you all for joining us virtually today and being flexible. It's always a joy to get to share our work and talk about games and how we can use that to educate a broader public.